Hello, and welcome back to the Untitled One Piece podcast. I am Britt, your host, joined with RTY, and today we have our very first guest in Dexter Riley. Dexter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your time in the One Piece card game?
My name is Dexter, as Britt said, and I'm a local player to Kansas. I started out in OPO1 when I decided that coming back to TCGs, I did not want to play Pokemon anymore. And so my wife and I bought some starter decks in OPO1, and for a good period, we just played against each other before going to our first local tournament. And I won the first local tournament with Red Green Law, and from there I just kept expanding the amount I was playing and going to regionals. And then recently I've been taking a break to pursue school more.
Yeah, I think we've, even in just our two episodes, I think you've come up a number of times. I think pretty clearly Dexter is the best player in our area here in Kansas City. Even as I've improved as a player, I just feel really stubbed playing you sometimes. It's always very motivating to me. I don't understand on some level people who, hit their walls and then just immediately give up. Like I want to keep getting better, and it's nice to always just have the bar move or have something to keep measuring against.
Yeah.
But I guess just some basic questions. I'm curious. You come from Pokemon like I do. One Piece is a harder card game, I think. There's just a lot of basics, a lot of fundamentals that I think take you a really far way. And then in terms of really knowing your matchups and things like that. It took us, Rayshon and I both, I think, a fair amount of time, even playing for a couple months, and still now, and even on some levels, really just figuring out some of those basics still. How long do you think, starting from the beginning, when do you think the game like really clicked for you? Because I know you started performing pretty well, almost right off the bat, like a top 16 in '02, right? I want to say.
No, I came in 19th at the second Peoria regionals with Zoro.
It's still not bad. Neither of us have a 32 placement yet. But yeah, did you have help? Were you talking to? I think you've mentioned before talking to Russell Lepar maybe a little bit. But yeah, what do you think really helped you out sort of early on in the game, learning things?
Well, I think in '03 is when I first got coaching. I got coaching with Noel on Ace because Ace is my favorite character. I was really excited to play Ace. And then right after that, the bans happened, so I didn't ever get to play Ace. And I built my own smoker deck, and that was my first top 16 in the 03.5 format after those bans. And then I actually played against Noel in that tournament and beat him with the smoker, and he was like, "You shouldn't be playing that deck. That's a bad deck." And that was prior to then. '04 was my most successful period where I top 16 with Law and then won a regional with Law. And a lot of that honestly was just about how much I was playing. My wife and I were playing like 3 hours every day. We were just having a lot of fun with the game, and I think getting that amount of reps in allowed me to have a significant confidence with the deck. And honestly, I feel like just having confidence takes you a really long way in this game.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think it seems to be just a tried and true fact in all card games, even if it ends up being a deck that you understand is maybe going to have a bad day if you don't get the right matchups, but just knowing it as well as you possibly can is always better than just transitioning to the best deck, even if it's one you don't know particularly well. Yeah, I guess just some final intro questions here. Do you have a favorite format, a favorite deck? And I guess kind of interesting there. One kind of semantic I always like to tease apart of these kind of questions is like, is that the same also as like what you would say, and not really relating to the deck choice, but is like your favorite format also the one you think is like objectively the best format? Or do you maybe land in a different space if that distinction makes sense? But just play with either question in any way you see fit.
Yeah, well, so '04 was definitely my favorite format. I don't know if that is the result of me having success there, or, well, I certainly played that format the most because I was enjoying playing it. I have my Law deck framed there. And Yeah, so '04 was my favorite format, and then going into '05, it just seemed like the right thing to do was transition to Sakazuki. It was just clearly such a stronger deck than everything else. But there were only two events for that. There was a 3v3 in California, and then there was Nationals in California. And the deck just felt unfortunate in that format in that it felt so reliant on drawing your Rebecca Hina Lucci loops. And sometimes when you were playing the mirror match, if you didn't have the Rebecca Hina Lucci that your opponent did, then you just lost, and there wasn't much that you could do about that. The same could somewhat be said about the law mirror match, with if only one player saw 5-cost law. But generally, how I am judging how much I enjoy a format or how competitive I feel in the format is whether it feels like you can consistently skill gap an opponent in the mirror match. So like if you're sitting across from someone playing the same deck with as you, that you feel confident that just based on skill alone, you're able to surpass them, not just one person drawing more Morias as became the trend for 6 and 7 and even kind of 8.
Do you feel that that testament is true with Dofi in the current format right now? Do you feel like in a Dofi mirror, because I felt that way at the beginning of '09, that the better Dofi player can win almost regardless of draws? Obviously, 4 Jinbeis to 1 is like near impossible, but like those circumstances are so niche. How do you feel about the Dofi mirror in this format?
I feel generally that is the case. I think Jonas's and Holden's success in the Nationals showed that I don't think that they were going to sit across from another Dofi and not feel like they could find value there. But at the same time, Holden also did lose to João, and even though I think that he was making somewhat better plays in that mirror.
Yeah, I remember that second game. He didn't draw nearly as well, and there was a turn or two where I really thought he had almost turned it around, and he just barely doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very impressed with that top four too. Yeah, and I think we may have hit this in our last episode too, but I definitely think that is true for the most part in the Dofi matchup. I think, even outside of like Jinbei can be a big deal, but it's like not the end of the world if it's only playing like crocodiles and things like that. It's really all about the bouncing and like you just snowball so fast, like going la 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 or like la Jozu to nothing is much harder than just dealing with some Jinbeis. But yeah, I think Dofi is like such an interesting example of a deck in that, I think last episode we talked a lot about it. Its merits, its ability really to do everything a little too well. But it's a deck that like, and I still feel this way. Like even recently, I've just been consuming like Jonas's article, his commentary, and I've been learning a lot. But it's like it's so powerful that you can play it average to poorly and maybe not get punished for it, like depending on your draws and depending on the strength of players that you're playing against. But then yeah, you play one of these, kind of titans in the game, and it'll just like it just feels like you're overwhelmed and you just don't even really understand what went wrong sometimes. So it's a deck that's like easy to pick up, but I think really difficult to master at a high level. And I think that's like a pretty good transition to at least one of our main topics on the agenda today. Um, I think just to get started, last episode we were loosely speculating, talking a little bit about potential bans, but I think now, as many players are probably aware of, I think it's the producer of the game who has been known to make these kind of teaser posts when the bans are coming, and he seems to have started doing that, I think. So people are a little well. I guess we're saying too, probably more obviously, that they've announced. It's not just rumors or speculations anymore. They've announced that I believe on March 16th there will be an update to the ban list, and I'll be curious to hear and express myself. Both maybe Rayshawn and I's thoughts have changed since the last episode. But what are your takes? What do you think are the right decisions here if you're making the call for Bandai in terms of how to hit this format?
I mean, I think that this is one of the most fair formats that we've had in a long time.
Yep.
And I think what really shows that is players' consistency and being able to top. So the same players are consistently making at least top 64, so having an X2 record, which I think is generally a marker of relatively good success in a tournament is if you can consistently hit that X2. So I think we don't necessarily need bans, but a card that I think needs to go is Pudding. I think that Pudding is a Pokemon card, and it's like playing N against or red card against your opponent, and I just don't think that that is what the game is meant to be. I like being able to choose how your game is going to go and you plan for your future turns, as opposed to there's just this possibility that at any point somebody plays that and everything you've done doesn't really matter throughout the course of the game.
Yeah, I think too, at least thinking in the bans, especially going back to our last one, which hit RP Law before we in the West had to deal with it in '08 with Black Berea. So I think too, that it's kind of future planning, perhaps more than '09 itself needing to be fixed. I think I agree completely. I think Rayshawn does too. It's a pretty good format. I don't disagree that there might need some tweaks would be good. Putting I think like in something you've talked about before is just and playing off what you just said ends up being I think really antithetical just to the way the game is played on like a fundamental like meta level at least. Like it's not part of the explicit rules, but it's just all about these incremental gains, little card advantage here and there, using your swings in the right way. Just to burn your opponent out of cards or bait them to burn cards in the wrong spot. It's hard. Like I think even going back to, just talking about the game in general being difficult, there's just there's so many micro decisions, compared to Pokemon. Not to say I don't think Pokemon is an easy game, even if it might be a little more on the simpler side, but your micro decisions are just like your discard targets, when to really dig with your supporters, understanding where your gust of wind effects need to go and things like that. But here it's like all of your decisions not only, it could happen multiple times a turn. Do I counter here? Do I counter this? What about next turn? But so much of those, really understanding how to do those decisions is matchup specific. And that's also a pretty hard thing to learn. Have to know how to play your deck well and then really know how to, fix the lines versus one deck versus the other. And yeah, Pudding is just really sort of just impedes that in a way. We've talked to, I think, like, I think even more particularly in this format, like, I think I've expressed, like, sometimes, like, I love physical games. I don't think there's any question that I prefer them to the digital ones, but sometimes in terms of just these, like, small, like, nerfs or tweaks, they're just out of our reach because of, like, the production needs and things like that. And, like, I think that last time we talked about, like Pudding, I think could be a fair card. Like if it checked hand size, like Blocker Law or Isho, it should have 0 attack too. Like it plays so naturally into what it wants to do. You play it for 4, which is all that Dofi does, and then you attach it onto it, get a free card maybe. Just little tweaks like that, and then I think, at least for me, and I'll ask Sean next, but I think outside of Pudding, the only card that's like really on my mind is the starter deck SR Law for Dofi. And it's just a small tweak. I just think it's a tuning miss that I think if it only hit 1 or 2, it would be okay. Um, but it just not just in how it contributes to the snowball in the mirror, but it's almost invalidates just like every other kind of mid-range deck, any kind of deck that like wants to commit to the board on like 3 or something like that. Like I was testing the other day, I think just playing Boa, but I don't know. I just saw Zoro Joro, and it's like, what's that gonna do? Like, you wasted your whole turn playing that, and I'm just gonna bounce it every time it comes down. And so I think 1 or 2, it would be still a great card, still very much playing into the value loops you can do with Sengoku. But yeah, even like 2 also played against a Katakuri, and they played Paros Pero, and it's like, not anymore, buddy. Like those cards don't stick, and then it snowballs with, say, the Jozu or even another Law, and then Graft Blade. It's just so hard for you to stick some of these decks to stick on board. What about you, Rayshawn? Like, just give us your general thoughts, and maybe I know a lot of people are discussing, I suppose, 2 things here. Moria, always on people's mind as a potential card to hit, as well as the card prices are indicating. Some speculators are maybe hoping that Sakazuki is coming back in the way that cards are being bought right now.
Yeah, I mean, so when it comes to normalizing Dofi, and we've talked about this plenty of times, it's always been Law for me. I always thought Law was always the problem card. So I'm not shocked if Law is the one to go. If Law goes, if they hit a card, I don't think Dofi itself as a leader needs to be banned, but I just do have that concern with Bandai that that's the easy way and that's the route they're gonna take. Um, so as far as Dofi goes, it definitely Law. The problem I have with this format or banning in this format is that we kind of see Dofi getting pushed out a little bit already. And if you hit Dofi, you almost have to hit Black in some way, shape, or form to save the game, like in my opinion. Otherwise, we're all going right back to Lucci. We're all going right back to Smoker. We're all playing Moria, Rebecca, Spandine, Lucci in some way, shape, or form. So, if you're going to hit one thing, you almost have to hit another. I don't know what that is, whether that's Moria itself or Rebecca or something like that. I also think that Blackbeard doesn't make it out unscathed. I do think Blackbeard gets something hit. I don't know whether that's Kuzan or a search or something. I think the Kuzan card is insane, just not being able to answer that card at all. And then, and Blackbeard just getting a free draw and being able to play Van Augur from trash is just it's absurdly busted. So yeah, I was one of those people who just said bans aren't going to happen because the game is fine right now. I feel like Moria got pushed out of the game, just power crept. And I feel like Dofi was fair but strong, and naturally over time, like we see it with the OP11 leaders, like he was going to get power crept out of the game as well. So yeah, I think if I had to hit something, if I was Bandai, it's probably Law, and it's probably like Rebecca or Moria, just to keep the game in check. But most likely it's just Dofi leader and then something irrelevant.
Yeah,
Tempest kick.
like in my head, like I think Moria is like almost in a fine spot. It didn't seem to perform super well in 10. Like Lucci's still around. There was kind of this, I think, ebb and flow in part of the East's 09 and 010, where it was like Dofi's turn, and then Lucci came back, and then BY comes back. But yeah, I don't know what you hit in Blackbeard, but like I think that ends up being really kind of the biggest thing to worry, because like Blackbeard I think is just maybe the best deck in a world without Dofi. Like the whole story of the format is
Easily.
just like it exists. Dofi exists, and like
Well,
it struggles against purple Luffy for sure is not the easiest matchup. But like I think Blackbeard would be performing super well if like that's the only thing that it takes to hit.
that's
But
until
it's just
EB02
like,
though, right? Because Green Purple Luffy
right,
has a very good matchup in a Blackbeard for the
right.
same reason that Pluffy does. And I think the understanding of what Green Purple Luffy is that it's just better Purple Luffy right now. It's just more consistent, better Purple Luffy, which Blackbeard art, like you said, doesn't like seeing that. So, yeah, I do agree that Blackbeard probably does become BDIF, but it also has its checks and balances as well.
It's like hard too, because another thing I think we've maybe hit on some of these points before. Like Blackbeard, even if it were like a bad deck, is say kind of how Nami is not a super relevant meta deck right now, but it's just like so unfun to play against. There's just like so many decks just like not only can they not beat it, like it's a deterministic kind of matchup, but you just sit there and just play vanillas all game, and it's just not fun. You watch all your stuff just get removed, and yeah, they get the new 6-cost event, and Kuzan are nice buffs. I don't know what you hit. Like
Yeah.
the power is in the leader, and just sort of how the whole deck functions. There isn't like a particular card that's problematic. I have no idea how you would hit it in a right way.
Yeah.
Other than just getting rid of it, but I don't know if that's the right decision either.
I mean, we also haven't
What are
played
your thoughts?
OP10 too much our side too, but I think
Yeah.
also they have an opportunity here because to fix their problems before it becomes a problem here, especially if the rumors of a global release with these starter decks is true. You can fix whatever is busted with Blackbeard and OP10, EB01, since it's getting support again in those starter decks. So you can almost just oopsie daisies, we messed up. Here's some more cards to fix our problem. We'll ban Kuzan or whatever else we think is the issue.
Yeah, what do you think of? Give us your thoughts on Blackbeard, Dexter. Both maybe if you have any thoughts on how to hit it in a meaningful way, or just how you sort of think it may occupy a future meta game, depending on a hard Dofi hit or something like that.
What was the representation of Blackbeard and Lucci or just Moria decks in the EB02 tournament?
It wasn't a lot, honestly.
7 of each in the 32. I'm not sure the general number. Yeah, Teach and Lucci both have. Oh no, this is total. Yeah, this isn't just 32. This is the total event. So yeah, 7 of each.
Yeah, and I think only 2
And
teaches
2
made it.
BY. So 9 Moria decks, 7 Lucci, 2 BY.
Yeah, and 2 teaches made it into the top 16 in total, and that was it for black decks.
And then how many Dofi was it?
It was everything was green purple Dofi, and then there was like green purple Luffy, and then like there was like 2 or 3 Dofis made it.
15 just in total. Yeah, I don't know the top cut split, but just looking at the 63 players, I'll just read it all. 19 green purple Luffy, 15 Dofi, 7 Teach, 7 Lucci, 3 Shanks, 2 Usopp, 2 Pluffy, 2 BY, 2 Vegapunk, 1 Smoker, 1 RP Luffy, and 1 Enel as the total decks. So I think that's a good point, at least in what we're saying here about Moria. Like, just kind of as strange as it sounds, like I think it's still a great deck. Probably always going to be very competent at locals and things like that, just in like the value that the whole engine has. But yes, especially looking to 11, decks like Kobe, decks like Nami, doesn't seem like it maybe remains super relevant anymore. Yeah.
But on Blackbeard, I think that any deck that has sufficient early game pressure is able to push through. It's mainly about the avoiding getting into the late game with Blackbeard, and I assume that the green purple Luffy is able to somewhat accomplish that with their restand Luffy with Rush especially.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think anything that you hit in Blackbeard that's particularly relevant, like, because really the only 2 things that make the deck are the leader plus the 10 drop, and because those are the most oppressive cards. And so if you hit either of those, the deck just dies.
Yeah.
So if they're doing anything to that deck, they're killing it.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I think too. Like Jesus' Burgess is a good card. It does snowball. It does play a meaningful role in a lot of matchups, but it's just like a symptom of the root cause. Like we were talking earlier in the week just about potential bans, and I was just like, yeah, if you banned Burgess, like it would be a worse deck, but I don't think it would really change all that much in terms of what it beats, what it loses to. You would just play like some Katarinas, maybe. It's an interesting card that just it doesn't really warrant the space, but I think it's a fine card, especially with the. I even talked about it too. I think when the Kuzan got leaked, you could kind of play it like the Prism Star Ditto, where it just said you can play all these like one of techs, so you just get in the discard and maybe just come to board in a relevant position and just counter or discard them with your leader anyways. But yeah, I think we've been accurate in recognizing that like Blackbeard is an interesting problem. Like it's powerful, it's painful to play against, but I don't know how you hit it whatsoever. Especially too like Rayshawn says, looking forward to the starter decks, just giving it some new SRs. Who knows what those will end up doing?
Yeah. That's a leader that's not leaving. It's a leader that's going to be forever relevant in our metagames for as long as it's allowed to, I think.
Same with Nami.
Yeah.
I think that's a good transition then, just to start talking a little bit more. I mean, we just went over the decks. Red Green Smoker took down the whole event, with Green Purple Luffy being the most played. But that's the new deck on the scene, right? That's really the only deck that comes out. It's the only leader actually, too, right?
Yeah, it's the only leader in EB02.
Yeah. I guess excluding all the shiny reprinted ones. But yeah, I think it's interesting. We'll talk about what the deck does, but I think it's why it's almost immediately climbed to the top of the meta is that I think it ends up having a good matchup against Dofi and Teach, which just were the most played decks in O10 for the West. So obviously it's a format away for us. We're going to have to play O10 ourselves first. But I know, Rayshawn, I think you've played a little with it on the sim. I don't think people have like fully cracked the lists yet. They still end up being pretty different all over the place, but we at the very least have the second place one to work with. Walk us through exactly what Green purple does as a deck, Rayshawn.
Yeah, so green, purple, very strong deck. The leader reads, activate main once per turn, Don -2. If you only have Straw Hat type characters in play, set up to 2 of your rested Don cards as active. Then this leader gets plus 1,000 power into the end of your opponent's next turn. So it gets kind of like RP Law meets Whitebeard symptom. Like you're constantly manipulating Don. I don't think you ever make it to 10 Don on this deck unless you see multiple Sanji puddings, similar to how RP Law did. And then you're just Whitebeard. You're a 6k leader until the end of your opponent's next turn, which is really strong. So yeah, and then meets Ploofy, right? Because you're just better Ploofy. You're playing most of the same cards as well, with being unique. And then the main MVP we see of this deck, as lists have been kind of slowly figuring themselves out, is the 6-cost Luffy, which I think on first impression, most people thought this card was all right. Like, not bad. I don't think anybody ever said this card was bad, but we were just like, okay, that's a good SR. Or, it's a good card, but it's not game changing in any way, shape, or form. But now we've really seen it take its place in its deck, and it's super strong. It's super busted.
Yeah, rush and attacking twice in a turn, 7k. Yeah, I think ends up being pretty strong, and just the way the other purple straw hats out of the set, out of EB02 play, just the Dawn negging is not particularly relevant. But yeah, lists are kind of all over the place in terms of like the event packages that they went to play. I saw a list. I think the team that won like a 3v3 maybe last weekend too, as part of the same Asia finals, played 4 Electric Luna. Pretty good in the mirror, pretty good against Dofi. But the one that won, I mean, obviously you play Gum Gum Giant. I think that's a card maybe we failed to talk about as a potential hit.
Yeah.
I think similar to Law, it's not like super problematic, but I do think it's a little overtuned. It's just such a power. It's +4, draw 2. It's just filter, and like we've all had experiences where your opponent has like 2 of them, and they can just like block out of 15k swings or something, a big old swing pretty easily. And it's one that it's just like, if it were just 3k, maybe I think it would be okay, but it's a very powerful, probably the best event in the game right now, I would think.
Yeah, it's also kind of unfun to play against in a similar way that Pudding is, where all the math that you've been doing to apply a proper amount of pressure can just be negated because they sit at 0 life and have 4 Gum Gum Giant, and there's no way you can plan around that, there's no way you can predict that, and there's no way that you can then strategize around it. So I can see where that card is especially one that people want to get rid of.
Yeah, it introduces like just a particular kind of variance in those late game swings where it's just like, I mean, this basically in verbatim was words of my opponent last night. It's like, let's gamble, and like I was pushing for lethal. He had 1 Dawn up, 1 card in hand. I knew it was giant. And if he like also draws into 2/2Ks along the way, like I'm cooked, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just can't. You can do your best, obviously, to plan for it, but it's a little different than understanding like, okay, my opponent has 3 cards in hand, 1 life, two 7k swings. Figuring out the math in those kind of ways, and then naturally here too. We only really see it on RP Luffy, but when you're a 6k leader too, it just goes that much farther.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. So like in this deck, it's very weird because you're at low Dawn count, so you don't necessarily want to rely on Giant unless it's like, I'm going for game next turn, because usually you're sitting at like 6 or 7 Dawn, so negging 2 kind of hurts. So but like you said, to your point of being a 6k leader, you just get to survive, and we saw it in the Asia finals. I think it was a mirror match, and guy won off of having 2 Gum Gum Giants in hand. It was just able to live an otherwise unwinnable game. So I definitely think it's a card that can be tuned, and I think people are jumping to conclusions saying that this is new tier 1, new BDIF, like really fast. But if that's true, if that statement's true, hitting Giant is a good way to normalize this deck, I think, a little bit. On top of, one thing I failed to mention is Sanji Pudding is like the bread and butter of this deck. If they don't see Sanji Pudding on 5, the game's just a non-game. So another situation here where a super strong deck, but feels mostly fair right now.
Yeah, it's basically like almost overstated for the cost. The 5 cost 7K that has the typical like kid kind of recycle effect. And then it draws a card too.
Yeah.
And then I think like the mirror matches like we talked about yesterday end up being a lot like Reiju, where you're just like you're in this tug of war with trying to do what you want, but not letting your opponent proc their like less dom effects and things like that. But even just like looking at these kind of basic cards, like both the Frankie and the Nico Robin are both pretty good, pretty efficient cards on the cheap. Nico is a 3 cost 2K blocker that on KO searches for a Don minus, and then you have putting in fact you can reset it, or like when you do it with your leader probably, and then Frankie ramps too as well.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the second place list, and you were talking about Luna, the second place list was playing Thunder Bagua in that spot. So, and to our conversation earlier, just people not really knowing what to play in this card, in this deck yet. Thunder Bagua instead of Electric Luna. And then he's also playing 6 cost Brook, which you could return Dawn, and then up to 2 of your opponent's characters get minus 2,000 power for the turn when attacking. So very strong if you're expecting to play against a lot of Dofi and Mirror, I think.
Yeah, definitely seems like a good, just an incredible card against Dofi. Wide minus and being able to, say you have the Rush Luffy and play 2 from a previous turn, just clear their board probably on that alone.
Yeah, I mean another reason why this deck has a good matchup against Dofi is the stage 2. Stage is so good. One drop draws you a card, and then activate main if you have less Dawn, equal or less. You can give something plus 2 costs. So we're able to avoid Law, and we're able to avoid Graveblade in some circumstances.
Even the little 3 costs we just talked about, they get buffed out of Law range. That's quite good.
So deck definitely has a lot of good stuff for it. Looking forward to us being able to play this deck in EB02 whenever that happens.
The stage also plays around opposing Electrical Luna, so it makes the Electrical Luna a lot weaker if it's not making like the Brook that they were playing or the Luffy stay rested.
Yeah, that is true.
And this too, I mean, just going next to then we've talked a lot about Luffy. It only got second. The real winner of the event, of course, was Red Green Smoker. And there doesn't seem like too many secrets to this deck list. I know this deck list I think ends up being a little different than I think people had been playing it before. But this just kind of looks like almost Bonnie with green with just some red cards basically. I think that even on some level too, its leader effect is almost like you have soft access to Cavendish all the time, or rather than the Smoker card, or the 5 cost.
I mean, your leader itself is Cavendish, right? Because you're always restanding 2 Dawn, and then Smoker is that 3rd Dawn. So yeah, I mean the deck is super strong. Like you said, it is just Bonnie with red cards. The list that won heavily teched for Dofi and green purple. So honestly, after seeing the list, like there's just no surprise why it won. You see a lot in like the Monet was a strong tech. I think for the deck, it came into play almost every time he played it. And then Mole Gun, Gum Mole Gun came into play a lot, and that card is pretty absurd too. So it's a 4 cost, and then up to one of your opponent's characters loses minus 5k power during the turn, and then if you have a character with 6k power or more, you can KO up to one of your opponent's characters with the power of 2 or less. So strong removal in that deck.
Yeah, and that comes out of the forthcoming like Gear 5 red starter deck, which I guess interestingly enough just seems like it seemed on paper like it would maybe be okay, but like none of those. I think this is like really the only card, maybe the Zoro, but I don't feel like I've even seen the deck. Like I'm surely it's won like one, but I don't feel like I even see it like winning flagships or something like that.
Yeah.
And like just today I saw Blue Crocodile is capable of winning a flagship, but maybe not the Gear 5 red Luffy.
Yellow Yamato got 2nd place.
Must have been fun deck night or something. Yellow Yamato is one of the first decks I sort of built, but yeah, it's not so good. I don't think it was okay at the time against Zoro. I think Zoro was a big deck, and it just ends up it becomes a 6k leader, which is good against all the 5 swings.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise it's just, it's kind of the full kid package kind of going to be, I think, oppressive and annoying for us going into the O10 format, just going, maybe you either have one of them in play, say Tashigi already, and then you go Kid Rosinante with Tashigi. It's just like, what do you do with this card now? It's so big, and the winning list plays four Hody Jones as well, just another very good efficient green card, just a good card to have in most circumstances. Usually the card loss isn't that bad, but otherwise, yeah, I mean, we see the Sanji and the Tony Chopper, Ben Beckman. I think too, even in this list, this might be the first time I've seen like Otama be played in the deck, which is just like, on paper probably the best red still, but I feel like in like the little O10, I've tested just like copy and pasting some net decks. Don't think I was playing this card, and it pairs so well with Beckman, particularly against other kids. To get around. Doesn't work against Tashigi, but it just say they just have the Resonante. Like in '09 specifically, like playing Bonnie into Shanks, like that's what probably the one line you're usually looking to avoid. That's just watching your first kid go down right away.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that the deck is just employing like the same strategy as OPO1 Kid, where you're gonna set up the kid with a bunch of bodies behind it, and you're gonna do it faster than that deck was able to because you have the access to 3 extra Dawn most turns once you have Tashigi set up, or rather Smoker as Tashigi set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Smoker, I was just thinking too, like we just don't see Banish at all in this game. I think it's just ends up being pretty difficult to position. But the Smoker is so good in any late game scenario. Just having a free 7 that doesn't draw them a card is busted. And naturally too, restanding the Dawn, getting that extra value. Say with Monet in play too, you could always play that off the kid as well. But yeah, it's just a pretty efficient deck. We'll see if it takes me off Bonnie, but I'll definitely be picking up the cards to play Smoker too.
I think it'll be your fun deck, but Noel is very high on Bonnie and OP10. I mean, it's going as far as I think he tweeted today. It's like top 3. He said it's like top 3 decks in OP10 for him right now. I was like, that sounds crazy, but I haven't really played the format too much to know otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that inherently it's that great of a deck. Like, if this deck popped up in Sakazuki format, it wouldn't do anything. It's because it specifically is such a solid counter for what the other meta decks have become at that point.
Yeah.
And that also is represented by the KO effects in the deck, the KO based on power as opposed to cost, because now everything has become cost related and people are buffing their cost with the stage and stuff like that, and then you're just ignoring that by using red events that consider power instead.
Yeah.
And that also has not been relevant at certain points.
Yeah, Shanks being really the best red deck in a year. Like, what is the last time red was any good? And it's like it's a great deck, but it's like I don't think it's top 3. I think what we can have a roundabout about the current format top 3 decks prior to any like banner restriction list. But I think everyone agrees that it's top 5. But it's just everyone's 5th deck or something like that, or maybe 6th.
Yeah. I think Tachigi is just such a strong card for green in general that green stocks are up in OP10.
Even Green Yellow Law, which Rayshon likes a lot, like kind of just ends up being another kid Tashigi deck. Like
Yep.
it's a kid. It's going to be a kid format.
I think that's a symptom of Dofi though. I think if Dofi wasn't in the format, you would build Law otherwise. But I feel like that's the only way you can beat Dofi. So that's just kind of how the deck naturally had to go.
Yeah, I mean that makes sense. It's a good like value efficient mid range deck, but you need that kind of that wall against a deck that can bounce you and outplay you on the board with Jimbei's and such.
Yeah.
Well, also, like that deck is generally, as a 4-life leader, probably just gonna go to 0 and then establish their kid. So it's not that difficult for Dofi to just play like 2 6-cost events and bottom the kid and swing over, because their value really is so significantly placed on establishing Kid as opposed to a Bonnie that's going to have more threatening 5-cost bodies like Carrot that are going to trap you even after you remove the Kid. It feels like this deck, once the Kid is gone, then you don't really have a way to come back.
Yeah, especially since you're taking your own life for your leader effect too. You're just empowering Dofi to just swing at you super fast before you can even like stabilize the game.
Because Dofi can also bounce Tashigi with Law prior to playing the 6-cost event, so
Yeah.
they have a lot of outs to the options if they choose to tech against you.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was just as another just point too. Why Dofi is just insane, just indisputably the best deck is that it has space to do whatever it wants. Like, we don't see Red Rock in really any of the top lists. Most of the lists have kind of settled, about it 46 to 48 cards all typically being the same. You just decide to play a couple Jozu or not. Everything else is kind of standard now. No one playing Red Rock, but like in a world where you had to beat, I don't know, like we've talked about too, I think Graveblade does end up being like sometimes better, even against Bonnie sometimes. But you could play both. Nothing's stopping you from playing both. And I think I've talked about it too. I played a lot of Dofi in EB01, and I just called it Control Dofi. I played 4 Red Rock and 4 Graveblade, and just late game I'm gonna remove a card every turn, maybe 2, and just make a body. And it was fine. It was palatable as a deck, like tier 2 for sure. But I did fine at locals with it.
I think 7-cost event is definitely better into Bonnie, but that's specifically because those 5-cost bodies are so threatening.
Yeah.
Like the most threatening thing that they're gonna have behind a Kid is like maybe a Beckman or a Smoker, like just a 7K that's not getting that additional effect to stop your bodies from working. And if you're just putting pressure on them and then remove their Kid and swing with your board, it's gonna be tough to reestablish.
It's also another factor of putting. I mean, if you're putting them efficiently, Kid just feels irrelevant as a green player. Like damn, I just got pudding and now I have no bricks and now I have no cards in hand, like no counter. This kid's just gonna die immediately, and now I die even worse. So.
What about Usopp? Because the last CS we saw, it was the Usopp Blackbeard finals, and Usopp won.
Mm-hmm.
Does Usopp just fall off going into EB02? I know it's also been talked about as like a deck you bring to a targeted metagame more so than like a large open one. But I'm curious to try to understand exactly that. And I guess players just in the statistics of what they brought, it's not like it underperformed. I mean, I don't know what its highest placing was, but like we talked about, there was only 2 in the whole event. So seemingly players recognized that it wasn't a strong choice.
Yeah, I don't think it's a deck that can win a large tournament. Because it's one of those decks that probably does really well into the top 3, but then just gets out fringed. So, you can lose to some weird stuff and then maybe beat the Dofi that you see. The Blackbeard matchup, like honestly, the Usopp shouldn't have won that. The Blackbeard probably through. So I think the Blackbeard matchup is really rough, and not getting any better. So I wouldn't bring Usopp to a tournament that I want it to win, but I do think it's a leader, obviously being blue-black. And the Dressrosa package and the synergy is super strong that over time, as the metagame develops, maybe later on, that's a leader that will pop up and be more relevant. But right now, I couldn't bet my tournament life on it right now.
Do you have any like particular examples of like the fringe that it struggles against?
I mean,
because in my head, I feel like it just has a lot of blockers. It draws cards. It has good combo plays. Like that seems like
it can outgrind everything that wants to grind. But the things that don't want to grind and they just want to kill you, you can just die. Like if you don't see enough 2-drop blockers or stuff like that, you can just die. And the reason why it outvalues everything is the removal package is really strong, but its removal is really late. Off of Rebecca Kiros Zoro. You have to see Zoro on 4. And if you don't see stage, and I think that's the main problem. It's a deck that's so reliant on stage. If you don't see stage, the game's just over. Like you actually can't control board early on, so you can just get ran over that way. But yeah, its removal is kind of too late. And and against board spam, it can just fall over.
So, do you think that the deck is just trying to push into the late game against Dofi, and how often is it able to accomplish?
I mean, it's I think it's a Dofi matchup is super favorable, because Zoro is really good, and then if they have stage on, you're never getting a free leader effect as Dofi. Everything you play gets swung on, so it's gonna out resource you that way. Cavendish is a hell of a card that's just drawing them cards anyways, so it's going to be able to out resource you in cards drawn. Even if you're putting them, they're going to draw the cards back anyways. Rebecca, Kiros, Zoro, bouncing 2 things off board is just absurd. Like, Kiros is bouncing your body, swinging into another body. Zoro's KOing another body, so you're just losing 3 bodies in a turn. You can never really stabilize against that deck in that matchup. But like I said, its Blackbeard matchup is pretty rough, because you're just never going to be able to play those cards and get like real meaningful value out of it. So I think that's why it's a little bit weak in the meta. I think Shanks also runs over it. You just can't outvalue 10-drop Shanks. So yeah, it's weird. I think Usopp though will be a deck that's more played in our meta than in the East. I do think that.
I think even just go ahead, Dexter.
Well, I think historically there's always like an expectation that we're gonna have these fringe decks, but they don't appear that much.
Yeah.
Like, people really do. If you look at Limitless and look at the recent events, people really do stick to about 4 decks.
Yeah.
I wonder, just think ahead of just quick thought here too. I wonder if that is, I would think that's probably because just the travel that is usually involved with our bigger tournaments, whereas in Japan, you can just hop on your train and, for the most part, I think basically attend any of these from most parts of the country. Maybe that's total ignorance, but that would be roughly my assumption. And here, people play their niche decks at the locals, but usually when you're traveling, that's such a commitment. Like, you want to win, you want to top, you want to get your cereal, and so I think that's why our results end up being a lot more concentrated. And in comparison, if you're local, and even I guess like store regionals are probably a good example of that too. As a bigger tier of events, where you might see just some of these off-meta decks a little more consistently, but same idea. You don't know what your friends and all the people around town or around the tri-state areas and things like that might end up bringing. Like the winning decks for the most part stay the same. But I mean, I got second with Carrot, and like I don't think that deck is ever really capable of anything maybe past top 32. And it's seen no results for similar reasons. I would think that probably plays something, at least plays somewhat into it. It's just it's an investment in itself, and I guess even there too, if you're investing, you're probably very competitive, and so since you're very competitive, you're more disposed just to play the best deck, or at least one of the best decks, rather than these these riskier calls. And even there too, we might see some like potentially interesting deck choices at the World Championships, just for it being smaller and much easier to probably predict. Like, I forget the total last year, but basically everyone was just playing Sakazuki last year anyways.
Yeah. I think it's also a cultural thing. They love playing their new cards. Whereas like Green Purple Luffy, for example, that deck comes out here and Lucci doesn't go unchecked. They're just playing Lucci. Like I don't see Green Purple Luffy having a actual lifespan here as it does in Japan, because we will just, if Lucci is the definitive answer to that deck and Dofi gets hit, we play Lucci here. So like that's just what's gonna happen. So versus where in Japan the new deck comes out, the new cards come out, that's what they want to play, and that's what they do. So super interesting cultural differences between the two as well.
Yeah, well, we also get to see the decks stop doing well as people figure out what the best decks are, and then we just copy their lists to start off our format.
Yeah, I think like at Sakazuki as an example, I think everyone started that, and I think the results speak to it as well. Thought that it was ploofy, and then it just took a little bit of time for people to really figure out the full build for Sakazuki, and then it took over. But then by the time we get it in the West, we just refined it a little bit.
Did we have when we got Sakazuki? Was Rebecca Hinaluchi figured out already, Or
Yeah,
okay,
it got solved in the East. I think the biggest contributions that the West had to the deck was the stage version that came out of Europe.
stage and broke.
You know, people still sort of Noel, I think, was an example of someone who really contested that as being any good. Making some enemies of the Italian player base, perhaps.
Well,
But
that was more because they were claiming that they had
oh no, he
invented the
played it a
deck,
little bit. Yeah, that's right.
but he had previously played the deck.
Yeah.
I mean, my first tournament of that format, I played the stage build, and that occurred at the same time that the Europeans did, and then they posted afterwards that they created the deck.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the concepts came from are still from the Asian meta. Even like people were thinking that Sanji's peel-off was an innovation to the deck as well. The first Sakazuki that did well in Asia, and I like translated his note article on Sakazuki, and he was an advocate of peel-off as well.
The winning
So
list
like
was playing peel-off, right?
no, second place list at European Nationals.
Well, the list that won Worlds, I think he was playing Pilaf.
Yeah, and then the list that won Worlds was playing Pilaf. So a lot of these like innovations that we felt we had already been also covered in Asian meta.
Yeah,
I think Brook ended up being different, though. I think that was something that, and I'm happy to be wrong, but as my memory goes, I think the like Brook addition to the deck was kind of something that didn't take over in the East, but was a dominant force at the end of Sakazuki's lifespan in our tournaments before it got banned.
Yeah, I think so. I think that was definitely one of the West innovations, which is crazy because that card's a black staple. Like that card's gonna be in every black possible deck ever.
Too.
So
it's like $20 a pop.
Yeah, I'm finally stopped being lazy and getting my alt art set, and it's hurting. So
yeah, that card is probably the most relevant card in the Dofi matchup.
Yeah.
Like whether you're able to have law in the early turns to deal with that, because you can't really commit time to swinging at it most of the time.
Yep.
So that card is already meta defining, right?
So yeah, I think kind of a good transition here. We've talked about, the differences in our format, so we maybe refine the list, but we've seen some speculation here. Maybe it's one of these big announcements that they've talked about for One Piece Day in Dallas in about a month. But there's a decent rumor going around whether the full game is going to be unified or if we're just getting the starter decks at the new time. But they've announced a new wave of starter decks, and so we have 6 more sort of coming on the way. I think like mid OP12, I think is when they'll come out. But the decks kind of monocolor choice with 2 exceptions. But we've got a Bonnie deck, a Buggy, Teach, Yamato, Black Purple Luffy, and Shanks. And I guess to start with my own thoughts here, I'm definitely disappointed. I really liked, even with the consequence of making Doshi the best deck, I really liked that all of their choices for the previous ones were trying to buff some underplayed archetypes, kind of maybe in the same way, which I was also hoping EB02 would do, and it doesn't end up doing it. It's just the kind of anime anniversary set. But yeah, we were all, it was fun talking about 2. We knew the starters were coming, and we're like, oh, maybe they'll do Moria, maybe they'll do Kuro, and things like that. And it just, every deck, but, maybe Yamato, and perhaps Black Purple Luffy, just top every event anyways. So they're not really hurting for support. Buggy, I think, is an interesting case where it's just like, we just don't really, it doesn't even exist in the West because there are very good promo cards that you want to play with it, and we have no idea when we're going to get those. Perhaps in the next wave of like regionals prizing, because we're getting like some of the Odyssey promos that I think kind of came out at the same time. But yeah, the deck really needs like that 7-cost Buggy, and I forget if it's a Croc or a Mihawk, but the Buggy is like doesn't let 4 costs attack, so it's in theory something you need against Dofi.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for them to print those promos in the Buggy starter deck. I think the Dofi one comes with the Jinbei promo, so it's not like it's unheard of for them to put promos in these starter decks. But yeah,
it does.
Dex, I'll let you go first. Kind of talk about your thoughts on this because I align with you. I really wanted a Gecko Moria starter deck for black. I didn't expect Blackbeard to get one already.
Yeah, it seems like a perfect way, just like in the same way that Dofi, just gets all these rusted down effects with Teach and Boa. Moya is so functionally close to Dofi, at least in kind of how the leaders work. It's just a different flavor. It's black, so it involves the discard a little bit more. But a three Dawn activation fee. Only 6 for you have to pay 2 Dawn versus the 2 on the leader.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like it was a good time to buff that deck for sure. I'm happy. I'll be curious to see what they give Bonnie. But yeah, kind of bummed.
Well, I don't even know how relevant the starter decks are gonna be. I mean, we got the Smoker starter deck that added Sengoku and Tashigi that kind of made a deck, but nobody really plays that on a high level. And Uta is on because of Pudding, and Katakuri is just not that great of a deck either. And so I don't even know what if there's going to be relevancy to these, and if there is, it'll be one card that's a 2-of copy, so that people have to buy 2 starter decks.
True. I think these
It's kind of just the effort for me. Even if it doesn't end up really being competitively viable, people have fun with the Smoker starter decks. I messed with Whitebeard for a while. Yeah, I mean, I think all these. I don't know. I'm just such a bad deck player. I would have loved to see some of the less popular, less powerful leaders just at least attempt to be more playable, even if the result is ends up still being a miss or something like that. But yeah, to your point, I think that's right.
I just think it's possible to have so many decks that exist at a competitive level in this game. I don't think that there needs to be like a requirement to 3 decks. And oftentimes these decks are carried by just one card that is particularly strong. And so if you can like figure out how to situate all these different decks in a more even way, it's going to be by releasing as many cards as possible that allows for as much innovation as possible, as opposed to how they seem to want to do the starter decks of just reprinting a bunch of old cards. I'm all for the non-hollow arts though. I like playing with those.
I think these starter decks would be a little bit more relevant than the previous ones, just because these are leaders that are already on top, or B, so close. Like Bonnie is so close. We see Shanks and Blackbeard every top 16, top 32, or something like that. Purple Black Luffy, so another leader that's not quite there, but so close. So I think like I'm okay with Green Yellow Yamato getting support. Sure, why not? Who cares? But yeah, I think total miss for every other color personally. These cards, these decks don't need the support just yet.
I mean, but it's also just dependent on what the cards even are.
That's true.
Like, because as we were talking about, Blackbeard has such a basic function. Like, what is even going to be added in there that is not like they can't print a card that's too broken. And it feels like anything that really supports the Blackbeard strategy is going to be something that's too broken.
Maybe this is a way for them to secretly buff other decks. Like, I'm excited for the Bonnie deck, just because if there's any good 5-cost Supernovas in there, I can just immediately throw it in Law. But I don't know, if that's by design, if that's the way they chose to do it, since Law's too new to make it just Law himself, or what.
I mean, for all we know, too, we're making assumptions that it'll even be close to the last wave of starters. It's a reasonable assumption to make, but it could just say, like, it just has Cavendishes, doesn't have anything new, but, making it an easy pickup. Kind of, too, like, in a way a lot of the Pokemon starters work. It's, like, a good intermediary for starting the game, not just a little more competitive than just like the base starter decks, but not quite the full deck. So
like
it just ended up being nothing. For
the
all
lead decks
know.
you're talking about?
Yeah,
those decks are insane. If we got something like that, that'd be honestly super helpful for the games and make it super healthy.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thought to have. Wishful thinking for sure that it'll involve at least some interesting cards. But yeah, I don't know what you give any of them. They all have different kinds of struggles, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, it could very easily just be an accessibility print, so that people are able to play these decks really easily just by stopping at the store.
Yeah,
Because right now that's the problem.
Blackbeard is like $1. Like the whole deck is just bold, basically. So it's like I don't know what that one would really solve. But
Well,
yeah,
I think it's just like people going into the game
yeah,
store and
yeah,
being
yeah.
able to buy a deck that they can actually play at locals.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So I think closing thought then for our episode. Let's talk about just I think like goal of top 3 decks in the '09 format. Like we're most of Dexter and I are going to be playing in Dallas in a few weeks. So like what is your take on like top 3 of the format, and we'll see if we differ. Dexter, you start.
I think that Doflamingo undoubtedly is in its own tier, primarily just because of its consistency. Most other decks can easily run into bricks. Basically, all the cards in Dofi are working towards the same function, so you're able to always be able to do something. It's not like you're gonna consistently be blown out of the water for sure. And then after that, I think that Lucci and Black Yellow are the other 2 best decks. I think that Black Yellow has a better matchup spread than it has historically. It's not just gonna lose to Pudding most of the time. And so I think especially players who played in previous formats with Black Yellow, if you actually pick up the deck or play against somebody who's competent with it, it can be surprising how it can take on a diverse number of matchups now, even beating Bonnie or Boa. And Lucci, I think, is just still incredibly strong. It has Moria plays, and its ability to remove entire boards or remove boards down to 1 card and establish a Rebecca, so they're effectively not that strong. And some people might argue that the matchup is 50-50 Lucci into Dofi. I think it's a little bit Lucci favored, just because you have to be able to put on a certain amount of pressure in the first 3 to 4 turns as Dofi if you want to win the game, or else you're just going to be trapped in an infinite loop. And I think that good Lucci players, they rarely ever miss removal turns. So you're just like, if you don't have the right cards, as Dofi, like Jinbeis and Peronas or teaches to establish a wide board, then you can just get stuck. And they have so many different ways to remove your bodies.
I think one thing that Jonas said, just in like written the article I read of his in relation to the matchup, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he may have expressed something to the point of it's like not even worth playing the 1-drop sometimes. He's very adamant about making sure you can protect your bodies. You just would rather have it for counter than just like watch it get brooked or something like that. Does that sound right?
Well, so the big thing there is that you don't want to play a 1-drop on your first turn if you can fit it into your curve on subsequent turns, because you don't want them to just be able to get free brook value on it.
Okay.
So if you're going second, and you play the 1-drop on when you have 2 Dawn and you only have one drop, then they're just gonna on 3 play their Brook, and you don't have anything to then bounce the Brook with when you play Law, because you don't want to play Law and bounce itself to bounce the Brook.
Yeah.
So that's why the 1-drop is so important. So if you have a Perona, and you're going to 4 Dawn, you can then use one of the Dawn and still have enough for leader ability.
That makes sense. Yeah. That's my top 3 too. Perhaps it's just kind of an uncontested top 3. Maybe we'll just pick our 4th and 5th off the cuff. But yeah, I think that's the kind of the general dynamics. Black Yellow's great. It beats Lucci, but Lucci just dominates almost every just other kind of deck. Anything fringe. Even Smoker too, to a lesser extent. Like if Lucci didn't exist, Smoker would be better. The only reason it doesn't see more play is that Lucci is just the better leader, in terms of just the way the other decks in the metagame work. Any differences, Rayshawn, or did we all accidentally land on the same 3?
No, definitely the same 3. Dofi, BY, Lucci. I've been on BY this format because I just really love how the deck is built and its ability to be able to win in those bad matchups that it's had prior. So I just think it's in the best spot, like Dexter said, that it's ever been historically. I think if I had to say 4 and 5, I'd probably put Pluvy at 4, Bonnie at 5. like those are the 5 decks I'd expect to ever see in a top 32. Maybe Shanks, like Shanks in that 5 spot with Bonnie.
Blackbeard also just won
Yeah, I
one
guess
of
we're
the big
forgetting about
online
that. So like, I
events.
guess that 4-5 is really contested, but top 3 is clear.
I think Teach is probably just fourth. Maybe it's the fifth spot that's really up for debate. Because yeah, Teach has a field day if it just gets the good
It just
matchup.
it does not in our formats has not had any placement that makes me want to put it at 4. Highest being what the top 16 at Nats.
That's just about Doflamingo representation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but Ploofy as well. So like the deck can fall to those things. But yeah, I guess I could see Teach being 4 and just that 5 spot being super contested. But I think since Worlds this year is 09, it's just gonna be BY Dofi everywhere, and the occasional Luffy or Lucci.
Yeah. I mean, maybe like I don't know. Like there's maybe a world like I've given up on Bonnie for the format to be clear. But like if everyone's on BY and Dofi, I think you could build Bonnie in a way to beat both of them. It's interesting how Bonnie just loses that matchup now, and it used to be one of our best matchups. Rygo plays a pretty big role, as well as the little blockers. I think we've talked about it before, but
Yeah,
that's my
Shirahoshi.
frustration. Is like when you lead her up at 7 or 9, and you have 2 Sabo, like, and that, like, I'm looking to kill you with a Hody play or something like that, and like if Hody's like only like needs a Don to even get a card, and you have an extra blocker, like it just gets really hard, and like a lot of what you would do in the past too is just try to stack, like, just play Dofi, maybe even not freezing things, just to get big bodies on the board. And then with that Hody play, you have that bigger swing, and then just with the extra blockers, it gets difficult, and I think the better black yellow player just understands how to, just plays the little blockers after they've attacked, so it can't get rested and things like that.
Yeah, I mean,
But it's interesting how it's transitioned from a good matchup to, I think, one that is not unwinnable, but just in the way the data clearly shows. BY is just winning it now.
yeah. I mean, every time I've played it, especially because like not all lists, but some lists are playing. My list specifically is playing the Thunderbolt Sabo, the yellow 5 drop. So you can literally, they Cavendish on 5, you kill Cavendish. They Hody or whatever on 7, you kill that. Then you develop Kuzan, and they play their 8 in their 10 drop or whatever, and then you just go Shirahoshi, Rocket Luffy with a Kuzan swing and just kill everything. So it's very hard, I think, for Bonnie in the current state. I think when Tashigi comes out, the matchup just flips drastically back in Bonnie's favor, though.
That makes sense.
But I think that there is a world where it's able to be built to specifically beat Black Yellow and to beat Dofi. Because I think Dofi is just going to be playing 7 cost event and 2 cost event Perfume. And so, like, if you can establish a strong kid was the case in 01 and many formats since then, where you just are getting value behind a kid that they're never able to remove, and you're able to establish enough blockers. There's not really anything that the current Dofi lists are able to do.
Yeah.
So if you can rely on that strategy there, and then you can implement something maybe with like Rosinante or 5 cost Supernova Protection Luffy, you can stop that removal that they're able to get every single turn.
True.
And and Hawkins is pretty strong also as a card that you wouldn't be able to remove, and maybe if you can build off those kind of things, I think there's room for, especially because Worlds is going to be such a small format, people are going to be able to, because that's the big tournament for this format. It's going to be like you can maybe bring some crazy decks if you just feel like it's really good into the 2 most popular decks.
Bringing Bello, baby.
Yeah, Bello Betty just says, pick up your cards against Law. We're all 4s.
Yeah, you play Dofi. All right, well, you got this one.
Yeah. All right. I think that was a good episode, a good first guess. This is, we are, just a reminder, this is the Untitled One Piece podcast. We are the only podcast about the One Piece trading card game. And we'll see you again soon.
Later.
Peace out.